Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Samantha Rosette and I'm a leadership and education intern with RISE this summer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashanti Calendar, and I'm a CEO and strategy and partnership intern this summer with RISE, which is a national nonprofit that educates and empowers athletes and the sports community to eliminate racial discrimination, champion social justice, and improve race relations.
As part of RISE's digital learning series, we will be facilitating a conversation around the presence of racism in collegiate athletics and what anti-racist action can and should look like in that space, from the perspective of the athletes themselves. We are fortunate to have some incredible current and former collegiate athletes and activists with us today who have and continue to speak out and create significant change surrounding social and racial justice in their respective spaces. We would have them introduce themselves, but just go around and say your name, your school, what you're studying, and what your plans are next. So we'll start with you, Danielle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Burns. I currently go to Villanova University. I'm a fifth-year graduate student. I'm currently studying political science, and I run track and field at Villanova. And I hope to pursue law and teaching after, but who knows?
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. Austin, you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Austin. I graduated from Georgetown University this past May. I played soccer while I was there, and this fall, I'll be a 1L at Harvard Law School.
Great. Thank you. You're next, Denzel.
How y'all doing? My name is Denzel. I'm a rising senior at Georgetown, and I run track and field, majoring in psychology. Next year, I hope to go on and get my PhD.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, Sam.
Hey, what's up? I'm a current basketball player at Penn State. I'm majoring in human development, and I'm a junior. I don't really know what I want to do after my basketball career, but I'm working on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you guys being here. So before we begin this conversation, we just want to be really clear that this is a safe space and that everything said here will be used constructively to continue to enact change following this discussion. The expectations of this discussion are just to simply educate each other and anyone watching to spark more conversation and action around anti-racism in collegiate athletics. So we can just jump right into it. Obviously, there has been a surge in interest and priority surrounding racial justice in the last few months following the tragic murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. There has been an increase in the number of college campuses and institutions that have begun to delve deeper on what they can do in the fight for racial and social justice, as well as to improve the diversity and inclusion initiatives on their campus. What have you guys learned or noticed that sticks out to you since this surge?
So I think something that has stuck out to me is like the amount of institutions that are kind of hopping on board with this. So I think all of us are around the same age. So our first introduction to this would have been Trayvon Martin. And I think what I'm seeing now, it almost feels like we just started existing, or issues just started existing. I think it's been really positive to see the transformation of institutions participating in this fight. But that's definitely been something that sticks out. It's like, well, thank you for listening, but also like, why are you just now listening? You want to stay positive, but it's definitely been something that's kind of been like on my mind since like the summer started with all this stuff.
So that's something that I've noticed as well, and a real concern that I've had. It almost feels sometimes like it's a trend for people who aren't Black. When like I've been thinking about these issues and have been angry about these issues since, like I was 10 years old, like at the oldest, probably earlier than that. So while like we need allies and they're important and we like welcome them whenever they come and whoever they are, it does feel like they should have been here a long time ago. So while I am like grateful for all the support that the movement is getting, I hope that it continues. One thing that I've thought a lot about is that this is coinciding with the global pandemic that we have. And for a while, it seemed like people didn't have anything to do but protest. And I, like, in the back of my head, I was wondering, like, would there be the same turnout? Would people have the same energy for these issues if, you know, they were still going to work or if they're still going to class every day? But I mean, obviously you can't, like, that's the situation that we're in, and we're taking advantage of it the best that we can. So I just hope the momentum continues.
That's one thing I would say I learned the most too, just the performative nature of all of it, because I feel like with the surge of everything going on, a lot of people feel the obligation to be engaged in some type of performative way. Like me personally, being from Washington D.C., it's like you see the mayor paint Black Lives Matter on the street, but her policies don't align with the lives of Black Washingtonians matter. And so that's one thing I could say I learned, just a lot of the performative and trendy, you know, actions that came with the whole movement.
A big role in this fight has been recognizing participation and the perpetuation of racism and racist structures. As student athletes of color, how have you experienced or witnessed racism within your sport, or even microaggressions?
I guess I can answer that. So I transferred from I'm redshirting at Penn State. I transferred from Binghamton University after doing 2 years, but the big reason why I left is because like I grew up in an all African American community, so like a lot of the ways we like deal with our emotions and we just carry ourselves is different, you know. But at Binghamton, my team was all white, and I was supposed to be like the captain, but like I couldn't lead the way I wanted to lead because I had to always do what the majority wanted me to do, or had to lead. You gotta lead best for your followers. You know, none of my teammates were like me at all. So it would be like small, like almost like every 2 weeks in practice, I would have an outburst just because I feel like every day I would be getting treated differently, and I would be acting like the wrong way, quote unquote. But it's not wrong where I'm from. It's like I'm just completely different from these group of guys, you know. And like every day I was the captain of the team, but I would get in trouble all the time for like just being myself and being natural, you know. And I just feel like as athletes, we deal with that a lot, especially on like a sport when it's predominantly Black. You can just still see that like racism and like stereotypes is like still alive because like even when you're the captain of the team, making like all conference breaking records, you can't even play your sport where you're supposed to feel like you're in a safe space. Like no matter how much successful you get, you still have to deal with little things like that. And that was a big reason why I transferred. So, you know, things like that is something that needs to change within like athletes. And that's when I like realized racism and stuff, you know, is still alive inside the sports.
I say just going off of that, and thinking of the way that I've experienced it, I think in sports and especially going to PWIs, you know, I'd say like Black athletes, like we're paraded. So it's not like we feel the same things that, you know, Black students feel because we do have that, there's that difference. If you're thinking of maybe like a hierarchy where like we still get the pluses and the advantages because we're athletes and we give a benefit to the institution. But I think something like, as Samuel was talking, like the difference with like how we act. So like there's Black culture, we have our own mannerisms, the way that we talk, our own dialect. And I would just notice like the way that I would talk, like my coaches would like often be like, hey, like, why are you talking like that? Or, you know, fix the way that you talk, like that's not proper grammar, or you shouldn't be acting like this. And it would kind of be like, you know, my white counterparts, I would say like, you know, sometimes they might have been acting up, but it wasn't, it was seen as, it was more acceptable than for me to act a certain way because I had to carry myself to 5 higher standards than my white counterparts. So I feel like in a way, like that was a microaggression to me because like because I'm Black, like the way that I act needs to look different. Because I kind of have to, I feel like in a way, like we kind of have to like, for lack of a better term, like whiten ourselves under like the guise of like professionalism. So like just like a really quick anecdote, we had to go to the airport and we have to dress a certain way. So we have to dress nice, presentable, business casual. and I thought what I had on was business casual. And, I got in trouble because, they didn't like what I was wearing and I wasn't living up to the dress code. Whereas, like, I saw, my white teammates had, like, something, not going to go into detail, but something that I was like, okay, that's not business casual. So how is me, wearing something like this not appropriate, but it's okay, So it's just like we have these cultural differences, and we're not allowed to really dive into our culture as long as we're athletes, especially when it comes to like PWIs.
Another problem that I've experienced at Georgetown, another PWI, is people like really limiting like your potential, or like limiting what they think your potential can be. So another anecdote, obviously, like, I played soccer, but I'm going to law school, and this like interest that I have in the law isn't new. I've had it for years. So people on the team and their families knew that I was interested in the law and in, social justice and activism, and I wanted to be a lawyer. One day after a game, we were at a tailgate, and one of my teammates' fathers came up to me. He said, like, "Oh, Austin, you're applying to law school, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm, applying this month. Like, I hope it works out." And he goes, "Oh, okay. Like, where are you hoping to go?" And I said, "Harvard." And he like kind of laughed. He was like, "Huh, oh, like, is that realistic for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually, it is realistic." But, and he didn't say like, "Oh, like, you're black, that's not realistic for you." But like, that's the unspoken part of what he said. Like, he looked at me and he thought like, "Oh, he's not going anywhere that's going to be like better than where I went, God forbid, because I'm white and he's black, and there's no way that he's better than me. There's no way that, he's smarter than my son." And, it's just like those like unconscious, or maybe not so unconscious, things that like slip out over and over again that can make the environment that you're in really hostile when you're like a contributing, member of a team and an institution, and somebody who also has things to offer outside of that that people don't ever see. So that's something that's been, or was, pretty frustrating when I was at Georgetown.
I think this would be a good segue into talking about what microaggression means. A common phrase some people may use when called out on microaggressions or racism is, "I'm not racist," or "I didn't mean it like that." So how would you all describe the difference between being not racist and being explicitly anti-racist?
I'd say being not racist, it's like, well, I'll go anti-racist first. Like, anti-racist isn't something that you can like eventually accomplish and then stop. Like, anti-racism to me is kind of like a character trait, so something that's continuous throughout your life. So you can't, so like you can be anti-racist one day, and then if you stop doing that work, you've lost that. So it's not something like you can accomplish. I think, and I don't know how accurate this is, but it's just my thinking is like maybe not racist is something you can accomplish. So you can get to a point where you're not racist. So maybe you're not actively participating in these acts, or maybe not even contributing to the, microaggressions, or you've got in your head that, you're not letting these stereotypes or biases affect you. But if you're not doing anything about it, you haven't reached the anti-racist point. And I think a lot of people, when you bring up racism, I think a good indicator would be when you're talking to someone and you're letting them know, like, hey, like, this may be problematic, or I don't like this thing that you're doing, or this may have been racist. And then you have a person say, oh, well, I'm not racist. Okay, so you're definitely not anti-racist, because anti-racist is about learning and keep working and an opportunity to keep working to something. Whereas like you just saying you're not racist is like, that's cool, but that doesn't really help in any way because those systems are still in place. So I would say like not racist, it's like, I don't know, I guess you can call it a badge because people like to use it as like a badge, but like anti-racist, that's ongoing 24/7, something we got to be doing every day.
I really like thinking of like the not racist thing as a badge that people just like to pin on and not do anything else with. I really like that analogy. I think of anti-racism as like a verb, like exclusively. It's not like a way that we describe people. It's like something that you do. And I think either you are actively anti-racist and you're doing the work to dismantle like systems of white supremacy, or you're complicit in racism, and there's no in between. So just to say like, I'm not racist, like I don't say the N-word. I don't do like these other blatantly like awful things that people like think of right away when they think of racism. That's not enough. You have to like make a real effort to dismantle systems of oppression that Black people are facing in order to be anti-racist. And if you're not doing that, you're not doing enough, and you're part of the problem. Like I think of like Dr. King's like letter from Birmingham jail, right? Like he said the greatest threat to progress isn't a Klansman or a citizens council member, right? It's the white moderate who's like okay with the status quo and doesn't like people rocking the boat, like doesn't like when people are protesting in the streets, doesn't like when people are kneeling, but still says I'm not racist. Like, yeah, you are racist because you're holding up systems of oppression. So that's the way that I think about it.
Austin, I love that concept of thinking about anti-racist as a verb exclusively. And I think getting into that, can you speak to a time when maybe you've seen anti-racist behavior being put into action on your team specifically?
So this is actually a pretty timely question. I would say the entire time that I was at Georgetown, I didn't witness a single instance of anti-racist action other than something that I did or another Black person on our team did. Not a single player on our team who wasn't Black or any of the coaches ever participated in anything like that. And as a result, I was on a team with 20 something people plus the coaches who were complicit in white supremacy, which is unfortunate. And it made my experience like not as pleasant as it otherwise would have been. But since I've graduated, one of our captains, his name is Rio. Rio is also Black. Um, he's been putting together like these talks with the soccer team to try to like educate our team on how they can be allies and how they can make a difference. So what they've actually been doing is starting this like combination of a fundraiser and an education like initiative through social media, where they're like posting on their Instagram stories about certain issues that affect the Black community, and also trying to raise money for certain organizations that are doing the work. So for example, this past week they did a workshop on mass incarceration, and they raised money to give to EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative. So this is like the first instance of active anti-racism that I've seen on my team, or actually like any sports team that I've been a part of. Even though like I'm not on the team right now, I still talk to the boys, so I'm proud that they're doing that.
I think that's like a really incredible example. And I think that kind of leads us into this next question of then, from a broader perspective, looking at the entire athletics institution at Georgetown or Villanova or Penn State, what does anti-racism in action in athletics, like as an institution, look like to you guys?
I would say that it starts with a focus centered around equity. Um, and I think it's like really hard to think of, at least for me, to think of like how can athletics move this movement forward on our campuses, because I think we have huge platforms and a lot of power. But I think it starts with and maybe this goes towards our institutions as a whole, but I think it starts with recognizing and acknowledging the roles that these departments and institutions play in white supremacy. Because like Austin, like I cannot name one non-Black person that I've seen participate in anti-racism, and at least in athletics. I've seen it, in other departments, but not in athletics. I can't name one. And it wouldn't have been, 2020 is not the first time it came up. Um, but I think it starts with like saying like, okay, we need to start addressing why all of our diversity comes through athletics. We need to start talking about like how does athletics help their Black athletes? What does it mean to be a Black athlete? And I think it starts with like honesty within the departments, and then them actively saying like, well, let me retract that for a second. not necessarily like them saying this, but us needing to recognize how we need to dismantle some of the things that go on in an institution, because I don't think any institution in America right now can say they're anti-racist. You can say, like Austin was saying, it's a verb, so you can say you're working towards it. But you know, you're an institution and we're saying that this racism is institutionalized and systemic. So don't do anything unless you're first addressing, hey, we are Villanova and we contribute to white supremacy and systemic racism. We may not do it openly and think that Black people are inferior, but we were built during this time. We were built when Black people weren't people. Villanova was built on a freedman's land. The money that was used to save Villanova came from a Black man. But nobody on campus knows that. I just found out about that because someone did a history project on it and they went into the archives. So I think it starts with addressing, where do PWIs, what role did they play? Because we've already learned, I think Georgetown, Duke, Brown, that they all got money from slavery. And we can't go back and change the past, but if you can acknowledge and recognize, like, hey, we did contribute to this and we're fighting for equity, because we equality, cool, equity, next step. And I think that within athletics, and I don't mean to go on a tangent, but like within athletics, like that's where most of our Black students are. So it's up to them to say, we will lead the charge, because not only did we bring you here, but we owe the most to you, because Black athletes give the most to these departments, not in comparison to the other athletes, but all of our time is there. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's up to them to say, like, this is our duty to do this. Like, we shouldn't be having to tell athletic directors and departments to care about our lives. They profit off of our bodies. So, you know, you need to care about us outside of the court and the field. Like that's where that has to start in my eyes.
Going more like in depth into that, what behaviors or changes would you like to see from your coaches, administrators, and athletic director on campus regarding anti-racist action?
I think something that would help me during my experiences was for like athletic directors or head coaches, just to like empathize and like understand like where a kid is coming from when he like speaks out or acts a certain way. Like understand that it's an African American male or woman that is surrounded by, that are in predominantly white institutions. Every time they wake up, like for me, I never had a white neighbor, so but all my schools were predominantly white. And it's like, so like me waking up at school away from my family, away from my normal life, and just walking to class is like it's mind blowing. Like it's like crazy. It's like already not normal and building up stress. You know what I mean? So they just need to understand how hard it is. Like they think, like if you just like, it's not that hard. And that's the crazy part. Like if you actually just analyze it, like if I was a coach, I would probably figure this out in like 5 or 6 minutes if I'm really thinking and if I'm really concerned. Like kids, like African Americans wake up in predominantly white institutions and cities, and they go to that school, they're in the class, it's probably 5 Blacks. The rest of the kids are white or other races. They're away from their family. Then once they get to the predominantly white institutions, some sports teams might be filled with white athletes, and you're still the minority. You know, you're used to being the majority, but in order to be successful in life, they say it's crazy that you have to go to a predominantly white institution. Like it's sad. Like I would much rather be at the HBCU for basketball, but sadly, like I just feel like I have a higher chance going to a predominantly white institution. You know, so if the coaches and athletic directors just understand that, like, just take like 5 or 6 minutes out of their day, and before snapping and saying something dumb, just understand like where this kid is coming from and what that kid is going to do. I think that would be a big step, and I think it's one of the easiest steps to do. But it also speaks volumes to the oppressors of like how much they really don't care. You know what I mean? Like it's just 5 minutes to take out of your day.
I think one thing I would say that'd be more helpful with like athletic directors and administration is just not maintaining the idea of whiteness and catering towards white fragility. Because I know there's a lot of people in administrative positions at Georgetown, they tend to do that, to maintain their job. And it's like, when you do that, you take away from the experience or the, just the authentic nature of being Black in a predominantly white institution. So that's one thing I would say, just dismantle that idea of whiteness and stop catering towards white fragility for the sake of a paycheck.
Can I go off of that really quick? I think that's like such a good point in terms of like catering to whiteness, because something I found in talking to the athletic department administration is the need for Black athletes to relive their traumas so that white people can learn from them. And it's like it's like Black athletes reliving their trauma for white enlightenment. And it's really disheartening because you don't get it at first. You really think you're making a difference, that you're telling all your racism stories to, your school president, your athletic director, and they're telling you, wow, I had no idea, thank you for sharing. And then you realize, I shouldn't have had to tell this story to you. We're all 20, 21, 22. This is our first, exposition into this, whereas like the people in power right now at our institutions have lived through all of it. Depending on their age, they've lived through a couple or four moments like this. They lived through the Black Panther, they lived through the LA riots, they've seen it. We should be saying, I had no idea, So I think what they need to do is figure out ways to educate themselves that isn't at the expense of their Black athletes and Black students.
Danielle, I think that's an amazing point. You guys have all said some really incredible things. And I think that gets to the next piece, was we were going to ask, why don't athletes speak out more against racial injustices in America? But I think it's more of a question of, why don't institutions speak out against racial injustices in America, right? Based on what you guys are saying, they're putting you guys into this box. And they're putting their Black athletes into this box that they are forcing them to conform into. And so how do they go against that system and start to speak out against it in a way that isn't performative, which it has been up until now, or currently is?
I mean, that's like the key question, right? Like, how can they make a difference and start to undo the harm that they've done for hundreds of years? I think like a key thing. So at Georgetown, there's the whole GU 272 movement. So like Georgetown would not exist if not for the sale of 272 enslaved people, like men, women, and children, like I think as young as 6 months old, somewhere around there, in 1838, I believe, down to Louisiana. So some of the most brutal sugar plantations in the country, people were sold to. And Georgetown students have shown that they're ready to start to like reckon with this, and they've tried to make amends by voting to pay an additional $27.20, like symbolically, for 272 each semester, to go into a sort of like scholarship, like it's sort of like a reparations program to pay to the descendants of the people who were sold back in 1838. The Board of Trustees at Georgetown has yet to approve this measure. So I think one thing that Georgetown could do specifically is to, one, approve it, but also to put their own money into it as well. I mean, like for institutions like Georgetown or like other peer universities who have large endowments, like one thing they could do is put their money where their mouths are, right? And like actually start to make real financial contributions to Black people who currently and whose descendants have propped these institutions up and enabled them like not only to survive but also to thrive. And like, I mean, colleges and universities across this country like owe their very existence to Black people. So I mean, that's just one area of many where they could make a sustained change. You mentioned like how to avoid being performative. I think a big part of it is like the timeline of the action that they take. Like if, Georgetown, for example, since I went there, I'll keep picking on Georgetown, right? If they put out like one statement, or they write like one check, or I don't know, hold a couple of dialogues, right? Because colleges like love to talk and hold dialogues. And that's it. Like this year, that's performative, right? Because you like you know, in the moment you feel like you have to say something and then you drop off once it's not in the news cycle anymore. Like this type of action, it needs to be sustained. Like I've had a couple of conversations like this over the past week, and everyone that I've had, I like to, remember John Lewis, because we just, lost like a titan of the civil rights movement and a very dear role model to, many people across the United States. I mean, that man devoted his life to fighting for equal justice under the law. And I mean, we're like 5 months into this movement that everybody's taking a part of, and already we see people start to slack off, So, I mean, if John Lewis can like risk his life, like starting when he's a teenager, and in his 80th year be sitting in the Capitol building, like a university can put some real effort for years at a time into undoing the harm that they've done. So like I need to see institutions commit to a timeline that stretches years and decades down the road to undo the harm that they've done.
I think that's huge in terms of like the timeline. So instead of plans that like span like the next couple of months, like what if like an institution had a 10-year plan that was like by 2030 we're going to have all of this. Like that's dope to me, because I've seen a lot of institutions where they make a statement, then within 2 weeks they've just hired a new diversity and inclusion director. So the fact is that you did it within 2 weeks. So you were scuffling to just get this person up there, you know? But I think it really is the timeline. I didn't even think about that, but like the timeline and like how long do you plan to keep this going? Because if all of your timelines stop in August or in September, we have a problem. Or it's just through 2021, it's problematic. But I also think a way to make it less performative is to research and really analyze like what the problems are within these institutions, because even if we tell them it's systemic and it's institutionalized, I like at this point I could see all these institutions being like, yes, we do contribute, them saying that, but then they're not even understanding what we're saying. So like something with Villanova I was thinking about is like, we cost like $75,000 a year to go there. You're knocking out an entire group of people right there. You're just marketing yourself to one group. If you're saying you want a 4.0 GPA student, you're also knocking out a bunch of groups. So when we think about GPA, SAT scores, tuition, why don't we start thinking about how GPA isn't inadvertently going to knock out Black students? Because something I was like telling somebody at Villanova was like, you're going to knock out the person who is in a single parent household, has to take care of their siblings while their mom works 2 jobs and can't sleep at night because they have so much to do, or they don't have electricity or water or something like that. So going to class and being able to memorize a bunch of things, they can't get that 4.0 GPA, but it doesn't take away from their intelligence. So like, why don't schools start figuring out, instead of us putting it on the students to want to come to us, we need to start attracting those students and start saying like, Black people, and I'm going to say Black people right now, speaking for my identity, they need equity, not equality. So not, okay, we're going to let them apply to all of these same schools. Okay, they still don't have those resources. So like start saying like, oh, we're $75,000, that's not going to work. Or, you know what I mean? So like really like them researching and understanding like what systemic means, because I feel like us telling them like, hey, you're systemic, we're gonna get performative, and the presidents are gonna start coming out like, yes, Villanova is a systemic racist institution and blah, 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 but without doing anything. So it's like, no more statements. Like Austin said, give me a timeline down the road at max, and then you start working on those things.
I think another big thing is understanding like the nuances that come with like the demands for justice, because when it comes to that performative nature, it's just a single or monolithic definition of what Black people want for justice, when it's hierarchies of oppression within the Black community, because you got Black men that's more privileged than Black women, and then you got so many identities that's mixed up into it. And I feel like institutions, they don't take into account the nuances of Blackness. So that's one thing I think that should be in that long span timeline, understanding the nuances and the intricate parts of Black lives and the elasticity, how far blackness stretches when you're talking about race. So that, I think that's the main thing.
I want to jump back to what Danielle was saying, because I think she made a really good point about making like institutions of higher education accessible to Black people. I think that's like huge and something that, you know, right away, like the institutions that we graduated from or are going to graduate from can do to make a real difference, you know, in dismantling systems of oppression that Black people face. I mean, so since I'm going to law school, I can talk about my experience applying to that. Like that is an incredibly exclusive process in terms of the expense. Like to register to take the LSAT, I think costs $180. Then it costs $45 to send your score to each school that you apply to. Each school has an application fee if you're applying to like an elite school that's like around $85. Like, and that's not even counting getting accepted and then having to pay $100,000 a year to go to law school. Harvard Law School costs like $101,000 every year. It's insane. Like for 3 years of law, to get a JD will cost me over $300,000. There are so few people who can afford to do that, or like have like a means to find enough scholarship money to even make that feasible. When some people may have like a dream of going to law school and making differences in attorney, and then they see the price tag on the education, and it just makes it a reality that's not attainable. Then another thing, like law school admissions seems to be so numbers based. Like you have to have a high LSAT score, you have to have a high GPA, and if you don't, people are like, like you might as well like not even try. And like I always say, like you never know unless you try, but like it's hard if you don't have those things. And like, I mean, every Black person knows you have to do twice as well with half as much to get the same opportunities as a white person does. And that holds true in college admissions too. Like the people, like my classmates that I'll see at Harvard in the fall are universally going to be exceptional, like I'm sure. But like the Black people that I see who are going there, like I'm gonna know, like you had to like climb mountains to get where you are. And I'm not saying that other people haven't done that, but I know like I can look at a Black person like right away and know that like you overcame like being Black in a country that like tries to oppress you, tries to kill you, and like you made it here. And even like once you get there, like there are people that, you know, will like say that like, you know, you're here because of affirmative action and try to delegitimize you that way. And yeah, like I don't know, accessibility to a higher education, like that's a really big issue that schools can really tackle. One, by reducing tuition. Like there's no reason that a school like Harvard, who has an endowment of $40 billion, needs to charge people $100,000 every year to go there. So that's an immediate thing, like cut tuition, like immediately. It's a big thing that people could do.
I think getting to our last question, we want to bring it back to this uniting nature of sports that RISE stands upon. And so do you think that athletics can remove itself from this overarching oppressive power of being in a PWI or being in an oppressive system overall, a systemically racist system, living in that? Do you think that athletics can remove itself enough to be able to create change in an anti-racist way?
I'm gonna say no, and I'm gonna say something that's probably controversial. But I would say no because it's still gonna be an American institution, and the people at the top are still gonna be a part of that. And it's still, and I don't, correct me if this is maybe not the proper term, but it's still for profit and it's still like a capitalist institution. So when we're thinking of like their goal is to make money. I don't know what they do with that money, but their goal is to make money. Um, so if your goal isn't your athletes or equity, then it can't remove itself. So I think, um, so I guess going off of that, it can, but it would no longer be what it is when we're thinking of college sports. Obviously, sports as a whole, that's a different situation. But you even see now is that sports is now acting as a barrier, because sports are getting more and more expensive. And there's a lot of like thinking like for myself when I'm looking at, I think Denzel might have said this, thinking of, or Samuel, thinking of like all of our teammates like still being white. So like people are often thinking like NCAA athletes, college athletes are black. Most of the people on our teams are white. Like it's probably like four or five of us on my track team of a team of like 60 people. I don't see a lot of black people unless I'm like in with the football players or the basketball players. So if you look at it, like sports scholarships are going to a majority of white students. There's like I took a sociology class and it was a misconception for all of us, even the black students. We were saying like, yeah, like this is how black students go to college. And it was like, no, majority of full ride scholarships are going to white students. And then a large percentage of that is going to white students that can already afford it. So I think athletics would have to completely reimagine, like completely dismantle, tear down from base to say that it's no longer a part of an oppressive system. Because what we're thinking of, like, it's not just the people that are in them. And I think that's where we kind of keep getting messed up is like, even if you have the most well-intentioned people in these systems, they're still broken. So unless you dismantle that system first and start from the beginning so that the foundation and the goal is equity, then they're not able to do that. But with the system in places now, like the goal will never be equity if the goal is to make money. Because you can't have a capitalist financial goal and also prioritize humans. Like it doesn't work. Like if we want to be honest, like we don't even own our images right now. So like, you know, like I don't know like where we're at with that. We're obviously making that progress, but it's like we're having to go back on the foundation of these institutions, and the NCAA and athletics aren't exempt. I participated in an institution because I saw a benefit to that. And like we were saying, like versus going to PWIs or HBCUs, we saw benefits to going to PWIs. And I think I would have been more comfortable, but it's about like, we shouldn't have to like choose that. We shouldn't have to say we have to deal with being uncomfortable and dealing with racism and microaggressions for success. So last point, if PWIs really wanted to be about equity and justice, maybe they would start giving some of their money to HBCUs and propping them up, because it shouldn't be about competition between educational institutions.
Man, I don't have anything to add to that. That was dope.
I think that's a great way to finish. I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here for an incredible discussion. I think that really gets to this bigger overarching picture, right? And understanding how sports is not just its own little bubble. It really is a reflection of the world that's around us. And so while we can use sports to create change, it needs to be outward. It needs to be going out towards this system that is continuously oppressing its Black constituents, its Black student athletes. And so I think that having you guys on this call is just an incredible way to shed light on that, especially with how knowledgeable you all are and what great fields you're all going into. So I just really appreciate it. I know Rise really appreciates it. We hope that the conversation can continue.